All right, YouTube, it is time to continue the Outboard Revival. Alright, so we decided, since the motor is running but we don't get any cooling water coming out of the exhaust, that the pump probably is completely either destroyed, maybe someone has already spun the engine with no water, or it's completely filled up with mouse turds. Okay, cotter pin is out, and now this little pin should come out towards you, and then that disconnects the shifter, I think. Yeah, like that. Okay, and now we take that off. If you grab it like you did earlier, front and rear,
right here.
Okay.
Oh yeah, let's come right out.
Man, this looks all really nice in here. Actually, my fingers, all greased up.
Yeah. Is that gonna come out if we?
Yeah, this usually comes with a. Oh, grab that. This just usually comes with the thing, and this goes right on here.
Comes with a thing?
I don't know if it goes that way or that way.
That looks right there.
Now I just...
Oh!
This looks like the engine was serviced before they abandoned it on the side of the road. Are we still on camera, by the way? I have no idea.
Yep.
Okay, what are we gonna do with this now? Oh! Here, let's relocate. So, water pump. First of all, completely shocked that this looks as good as it did. The boat was sitting in a tow yard for probably better part of 10 years. And then we pull this apart and there's fresh grease here everywhere. It's not even, I mean, the water pump housing right here looks like it was put on yesterday. And the grease that is on here, I mean, it's not the type of grease that I would necessarily use for a boat, because this doesn't look like marine use grease, but everything is looped up really nice. Very nice, I gotta say. I don't know which side goes up and which side goes down. I would say probably doesn't matter. That's also different. On a 85 horsepower Mercury, the drive shaft would be one piece. Here's a coupler in between. So now we're going to take the water pump housing off. Okay. So water housing, what helps is you put it into gear, and then have the drive shaft spinning and pull it off. And here's a little, here's a little boring for the rotary at the top, which we can't pull off the floor. That probably helps a little bit. This is really, I'm shocked. Oh, there's no. Oh, that's much more. I am shocked. In preparation for the stay, I've already bought a new pick out for the water pump. Now, stand myself in the figure. My figure 73000. Yeah, you can shut the price right. Yeah, these are the rules. Okay, watch out off. Okay, what do you think? So what do we do now? You price up. I don't like that. There we go. There's a gas in here. I definitely know it's like gas. I haven't gas in this. How you want me to do this? There you go. Okay. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's already one little thing of this impeller missing. One little, whatever it's called. You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Whatchamacallit? Oh, the...
One finger. Let's call it a finger. And then, you know what? I also want to... This is so clean, I can't even fathom this.
Now we just wanted to install a new impeller, but unfortunately the impeller that I had ordered from eBay didn't fit. So we had to wait a couple days until a new impeller had arrived.
So if you ever pick up an old boat that has been sitting for years, first thing you got to check when you get it running, if you actually have water coming out of the exhaust. So on a outboard engine, let me show you here down at the bottom there. Here at the, in this particular instance here, this is a Force 85 from 1989, has the water intakes right here in front of, so this would be the side front of the boat, right? This is the direction we're going. Here are on both sides of the lower unit are water intakes, and that's where the water pump, which is mounted right on top, make sure you're all focused and such, right on top of the drive shaft. So this is the long drive shaft coming down from the engine, permanently spinning. This thing is spinning when the engine is running. When you're in neutral, all the gear shifting happens here in the lower unit. This is pretty much your gearbox down here. Up here, right next to the drive shaft, is the shifter shaft, so to speak. So right now we're in neutral. No, we're not in neutral. Now we're in neutral. Now you can spin the propeller in any direction, but the drive shaft doesn't move. So that means if the drive shaft would be spun by the engine, the propeller wouldn't be driven. So, and then with your shift control inside your boat, you move the shifter shaft and you're engaging either the forward gear or the reverse gear. And so that means regardless of gear setting down here in the gearbox, the drive shaft turns, and that in turn turns in turn, whatever, spins the water pump. And the water pump is an impeller type water pump. Here's the housing. And this actually looks relatively clean and new. I want to say this water pump hasn't seen much action. Problem is, as you can see, the opening here for the drive shaft is off center. And so what that means that those little fingers here on the impeller, this is rubber, they have to flex. So as this is spinning, they're always being squeezed and then they expand, and then they squeeze and expand. And this motion actually gives it this pumping action and the increase in water pressure. And so the pump here really only has, let me think, one intake and one exhaust channel. So it sucks the water from near the propeller down here, and then it squeezes it out of the pump housing here, up out of this tube. And at the bottom of the engine where this gets mounted, there is a steel tube that slides in here. You have to have some grease in here. It's a very loose fitting. It's not a perfect fit, I guess, because there's no rubber in here. This is just a hard plastic connection, but this is tapered, and the steel eventually just slides in there and makes a relatively good seal. And that pipe goes all the way up to the cylinder heads, and there's a water jacket where this water gets pumped through. So if you pick up an outboard engine that has been sitting and sitting and sitting, this here probably has been sitting for 10 years in this tow yard from where I got this boat from. So the engine part, you know, it's a two-stroke engine, so there's probably a lot of oil residue left in the cylinder heads and the cylinders and piston rings, and all the bearings there are still lubricated. And that lubrication usually doesn't just disappear. But this rubber impeller that sits in this housing, one side completely squeezed together, the other side more or less relaxed, hardens up because, you know, rubber has softeners in the material, and those eventually they kind of evaporate, or you know, they dissipate, and then the rubber gets harder and harder and harder. And then the first time that you actually start this thing up, let's see if we can get this to focus. There it is. So the first time you get this started up, this is what happens. One of those fingers breaks off, and if one of those fingers is broken off, then pretty much every time this thing comes around, the pump completely loses its one side suction and the other side the pressure to pump it up into the engine. And so we didn't have any cooling going on. So here at the lower unit, unless you are in a lake or in a river, you put looks almost like headphones on here. They are made out of rubber. They seal around those water intake ports, and you hook a garden hose to it. So you're more or less pressurizing these ports with garden hose water. And that usually just pushes water right up into the water pump coming out here. And then the pump really doesn't have to do all that much. But yeah, with our broken impeller, and this is like rock hard, this thing, we couldn't get the cooling to run. And how you can tell if it's like a Mercury or a Johnson or an Evinrude, they usually have a little, so if you imagine this here's the lower unit, and the shaft of the engine continues, and then eventually you have the power head. On the side of the power head housing, you have a little nozzle, and it's literally just peeing water out of it. And the stronger the stream of water coming out of that little nozzle is, the better your water pump is working. If you don't have water coming out of this little nozzle, then you have a problem with this impeller, and then you shouldn't be running your engine because you're going to overheat your engine. So when I saw that the engine was running rough, it wasn't running nice, we definitely have to do some carb cleaning, at least carb cleaning. Maybe a rebuild is probably in order. It's a 3-cylinder, so you have 3 carburetors. They have to come apart and get cleaned at least. But after a few seconds, we didn't see any water coming out. Here in this case, this motor doesn't have this control little P nozzle, it just spits out water out of the exhaust. And so usually on the motor shaft you have an exhaust. Then here in this case, right down below here is this fin looking thing. That's part of the exhaust system. And then also the hub of the propeller here is hollow, and that's where water comes out. So here you have exhaust coming out of 3 locations, and in all 3 locations you should also see water coming out. If that's not the case, then your water pump is toast. And then you have to at least replace the impeller. Here in this case, the pump housing itself, this looks like someone just put that in and then they parked it at a tow yard. This is so clean. This is usually a plastic housing with a stainless steel liner, and this liner hasn't seen any action. You can, I mean, the surface is absolutely perfectly smooth. There is no any kind of rubbing marks from the rubber. I mean, you can imagine if there's an impeller going there, you know, 3,000 RPM for hours and hours and hours, and then you suck in a little bit of some debris and some particles in the water and whatnot, so you would get some wear in here, but this doesn't have any wear. So this is perfect. All the other parts look just as good. All the rubber seals here, they are still clean. The grease that we found on here is perfect. The gasket up on here, this is actually usually it's a 3-layer. It's a gasket, then again a stainless steel plate. That's where the impeller, one side of the impeller is riding on this stainless, and then another gasket. And even this stainless steel surface here is perfect. I mean, there is really absolutely nothing wrong. On the shaft you have it's kind of like a keyed situation. So the impeller is keyed on the inside here. There you can see it. And then on the shaft here, this is actually a flat little thing. There you go. That fits right into this keyed slot in the impeller. And here on the shaft, it's really just a flat surface. So you take a little bit of some grease, and the grease I just used dielectric grease because it's silicone based. Silicone doesn't attack rubber, and this is a rubber impeller. So when I put this back together with my brand new impeller that I just got delivered, this is of course made in China. This is nothing brand anything, but it looks like it fits. Yeah, you know, we'll see how long this lasts. Force and Mercury, they were actually the same company at some point. So first it was Force was a Chrysler product, and then Chrysler sold their outboard engine and water sport division to Mercury, which is a large outboard engine manufacturer here in the United States. They were both located in the United States, so Force kind of became their low budget kind of brand. And later, I don't know if Mariner is related to Force or if it's even the same models of engines, because I grew up in Germany, and the low budget version of Mercury was always Mariner. So I have no idea if this is maybe in other markets it's called a Mariner. I'm not a, you know, I worked at a boat shop 30 years ago when I was 16. So I don't remember much, but I still remember a few brands. This impeller is the same part number as on some of the 1990s Mercury. So part supply wise, those 1989 and up Force engines, you can still get most everything. The propeller looks exactly like a Mercury propeller. Yeah, so brand new. Let's cut this open. So when you get into the water pump here, you want to get this stainless steel surface that the impeller rides on really nice and clean. The same, you want to get the pump housing internals really clean. You don't want to have any debris in there. Make it nice and clean, and then you want to really smear a lot of grease on the impeller. So for the first startup, the first time that you actually crank this up with a new impeller, it has a little bit of some initial lubrication before then the water makes it to the pump, because the water is also the lubricant and the cooling for this impeller. If you always remember to never run your engine dry. You know, some people, oh yeah, a few seconds, no big deal. Yeah, the engine can do it. The engine can run for 20, 30 seconds, no problem. But your rubber impeller with any kind of cooling and lubrication, this thing is going to be toast pretty quickly. And yeah, this is completely. So I already had ordered one from eBay, but of course that didn't fit. Apparently this was a 1989 specific part number. So the 88 and the 90s had different part numbers. So I, of course, bought the wrong one. But this one here is the correct one. Dielectric grease, cheap, silicone-based. Petroleum attacks rubber. That's why I don't like to use wheel axle grease, stuff like that. This is all petroleum-based. You can buy marine-grade grease for this kind of application, which I should have, but I don't have it. So I'm just going to use silicone grease. And you also want to put some grease in between the impeller and your drive shaft, because the impellers, they like to get seized on your drive shaft here. So if you put a little bit of some grease in between, so it's all nicely lubricated when you put it together, then you will not have a problem pulling this apart when you have to. On Mercury engines, at least the ones I've used to work on, they oftentimes just have a one-piece drive shaft. Here in this case, it's actually a multi-piece, so there's a coupler in between. There's a spline, there's another spline in here, and then there's a spline up here. So this is way more, I think this is actually the better concept, but it's more expensive because you have to machine more parts and you have to have a spline coupler and all that. I like it, but it maybe was too expensive, so they changed the design, and then, you know, who knows. So you gotta make sure that everything is clean. Let me grab, here's some Scotch-Brite pad. There's a little bit of some corrosion here on this. There's actually 5 bolts and 2 pins. They're like dowel pins that kind of locate your water pump. Let's grab a rag. Even though there is such nice grease still on here, but you gotta make sure that you're not introducing some contaminants into your water pump, especially right when you put a fresh impeller in there. So give it a fighting chance. Once it was in some lake water, some river water, or even ocean, then all bets are off, because there's so much contaminants in water. When you reuse an old gasket, you can, with no problem, just put some grease on that gasket. That will help it slide in location. So when you put the water pump housing back on there, it will help slide over those dowel pins. Just put a little smear of grease on there. Put a little dab of grease on the stainless steel surface here where the impeller rides on. Grease it all up, you know, the threads as well, because stainless steel inside a boat engine with a lot of aluminum around, they also want to seize up, and then you can't take the nuts off anymore. So make sure you grease this up, and like I said, dielectric grease is perfect for this application. Not perfect, but it's acceptable. Then your key, little key spline thing here, make sure that's nicely held on with some grease, and then grease up your drive shaft here. You can also use the same type of grease and grease up the splines nicely, so that when you shove this all back together, it all falls in place and is happy. So bolts, grease everywhere. grease up your impeller, all the sealing surfaces. So the bottom here is a sealing surface, all those fingers are sealing surface, and the top as well. Just grease it up and you put it in a clean spot. Now we're gonna look at this here one more time. So there is old grease in there. I'm gonna clean this up real quick because it looks like it has seen 10 years of sitting in a towing yard. We have already blown through, so one water passage here is the one that goes to those intakes down there. I wanted to make sure we don't have a wasp nest or like critters living in there. So we blew from the bottom to the top. Nothing came, I mean air came out, but no debris or dirt or anything. So that's great. And now, like I said, the inside of this pump housing needs to be clean, and then the sealing surface here. And you can slather this with some grease. Again, we're just using dielectric grease, silicone based, no problem. Just grease it up a little bit so your impeller has the best chance for survival. Alright, and then you take your impeller, and it really doesn't matter in which orientation, there's no up or down. Once the impeller was installed and you're just taking this apart and you decide to reuse your old impeller, it will, because the engine always spins in the same direction. The propeller doesn't, because we have a gearbox down here, but the impeller always spins in the same direction, so those fingers are going to shape themselves in the direction that this thing spins. And so once you had this in here and the impeller slowly takes on this shape, you definitely have to, if you want to reuse it, you gotta put it back on the same way it came off. But if it's a new one, it doesn't matter. So, and then you slide this on. You saw that I immediately found the little key. It slid over it nicely. So now it's sitting on here. And like I said, we have this all nicely greased up. You take your pump housing, stick it on top of the impeller. So now we're going to do something else here. So as I told you, on most Mercury engines that I have worked, it's always a one-piece drive shaft, so it's much longer. It's sticking out really long. So you always have something to grab hold of when you put the water pump housing back on. Here in this case, we're just going to stick the drive shaft back on, so I have something that I can grab. And then you are going to spin. And in this case, I'm just taking a guesswork. So I'm guessing that it spins, as you can see me spinning it right now. So this is the direction that the motor will run. To get a little bit more grip on it, you just grab it at the very top where it's splined as well, where it goes into the power head, so right up there. So you can grab it. Then you spin this a little bit, turn it, as you push down the water pump housing. And then you pretty much force the impeller into this shape. So, and that's it. Now the water pump housing is on there. The impeller is pre-shaped. And now you just take, don't forget there is a rubber ring that goes up on top of the water pump housing here. You know, the impeller itself creates its own seal on the inside, but I guess they just want to keep grime and dirt out of here. That's why there is a rubber ring. Just make sure that's clean. Here in this case, we're not going to replace it. I only ordered an impeller because all the other parts look just so good. So we're going to put some grease on that ring as well. So I'm going to take the drive shaft off one more time, slide this over, nicely greased up. Yeah, this all looks very good. Maybe a little bit more grease. Lots of grease, always good, especially in boat application. And that goes on there, perfect. And then now we can already try to find the nuts and washers. Of course, you could always use new ones. But hey, we're talking about a outboard engine water pump. You know, so just reuse them. If you eventually feel like these nylock nuts don't lock anymore at all, so when you can spin those nylock nuts on by hand with no resistance from the nylon, then it's time to definitely replace them. You can probably order those somewhere specifically for your outboard engine model, or you can see if maybe your hardware store carries stainless steel nylock nuts in the specific size here. This is probably all standard. There's not much metric around here. This motor, even though it's maybe not the best, not the highest quality, not the most sought after brand, Force, you know, formerly known as a Chrysler product, it was still all made in the United States, so that I kind of like. You know, was born here, but I love the country, so this is all standard size. So this here is 7/16, and with things like where you have 4 nuts, just always tighten it down in a crisscross pattern. Pull it down with 2 and then go crisscross. This is a plastic housing, so you don't want to go 190-pound gorilla on this for sure. This is a long stud, and you're pretty much clamping down a plastic housing. And if this plastic housing, everything inside the housing is clean, there shouldn't be any reason why you're pulling on this really hard. So you just pull it tight here with my tiny little ratcheting wrench here. Perfect. So click, click, and you know, like I said, there are 2 gaskets with a stainless steel liner in between, and there is a little bit of give in this gasket. And then we also put some grease on there. And then this one, oh, that's the wrong size. That one here in the front is a little smaller. This is what? 3/8. So, and that is the same story. You're pulling down on plastic, so take it easy. Easy. There's probably some torque values to this, but it's not really necessary. So we have a new water pump. We checked the canal, the channels in here, the plumbing, that there's nothing clogged up. I have blown all this out. We have tried the gear shift mechanism. If I would be prepared and I would have some gear oil lying around, we could now drain the gear oil out. But since we're not ready to take this thing on the lake, I think I'm just going to leave it right like this. Maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the drain plug out with a finger and just see if there's any water coming out. If there's no water in it, I think we're golden. Remember, oil is lighter than water, so if there would be water in it, you gotta have a really nice large flathead screwdriver. This is really not a great design what they used to do, those flathead screws. So you gotta have a nice large flathead screwdriver. Mine are made by Wiha in Germany, and they even have a hex on there so you can put a wrench on it. And then you push your flathead into the screw and then turn with your wrench. Oh, we already slipped off, huh? And then it's also nice if your vise is not turning while you're trying to do that. If you really have a hard time, you could use an mechanical, like an impact driver that you hit with a hammer. Oh man, do I have a larger flathead? I don't know. Is this larger? Not really. So that's the downside. Marine application. This is a stainless steel screw in a aluminum housing with a flathead. So that can be a lot of fun, especially if you don't have like this super. It's not coming loose. Oh, I got it. Okay, push hard and use a wrench. So now we're just gonna loosen this up. I'm gonna try to just see if there's water coming out. Water always separate. There is gear oil in there and no water coming out. Blue in color. So this is probably a Mercury brand oil. So absolutely no water. There is a fill and a vent opening here. If you keep those closed, the oil is not going to come pouring out. And the gear oil that they use in here is also pretty thick. I want to say it's probably around 80 weight oil. So it's pretty thick. So you can open this and just see if there's some water. Water would always settle at the bottom. So we're good for now, at least for test purposes. Before I ever take this thing out of out on a lake or on a river, I will definitely change the gear oil, I promise. So that's all for today. Water pump is back on, all back assembled. And tomorrow, Monday, Elliot is going to come by in the afternoon, and then we're going to throw this all back together. That's it for today. We reassembled a water pump, showed you the new impeller, greased it all up. We also checked for water in the gear oil. That wasn't the case. That's good. Just for tonight, that was all I wanted to do. Tomorrow, Monday, Elliot is going to come by again, and then we're going to shove this back together out on the stand in my driveway, hook the garden hose to it, and do some more test running this. We'll see if it runs on all 3 cylinders, and if that's not the case, then we of course have to look into the carburetors. And maybe once we get a decent test run going for a few minutes, maybe we even do a compression check and see what's what and what's going on. Okay, so remember, old outboard engines, always make sure you check and change the impeller in here, or sometimes you have to invest in a complete new water pump assembly because parts in here can break and the plastic can crack and it gets all ugly in there, like barnacles are growing in there and whatnot. But this here is perfect. So I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing so far. You know, even if the boat doesn't turn into my dream boat, we have a good motor. Now I have to find a set of cables for it, control cables. They are so old, even though they're still working. I guess for test purposes, even taking it out on the lake wouldn't be the end of the world, but probably eventually I want to invest in some new control cables. But I think the lower unit is pretty good. Oh yeah, and a gear oil change is also easier if you do a test run on a stand, have a garden hose going to the water port here, and you let the prop run a little bit, spin a little bit, that it stirs up the oil in there and gets it warmed up, then it drains out easier. So put it on a stand, hook water up, run it for 5 minutes, and then do a gear change, gear oil change. Much easier, much easier. All right, that's it for today. You guys take care.